Hello, everybody. Welcome. We'll get started in just a minute. Welcome, everybody. We're very glad that you're here. My name is Bunin Benor, and I am director of the HUC-JIR Jewish Language Project. So glad that you've joined us. We have a wonderful program in store for you today. The Jewish Language Project does research and education about Jewish languages around the world. And we are very honored to share in some of our programs and some of our events with several co-sponsors. Today's event is Visual Art in Jewish and Native American Language Reclamation. Our co-sponsors are HUC-JIR, 7,000 Languages, American Sephardi Federation, Ayin Press, the Jewish Arts Collaborative, and the Skirball Cultural Center, where B.A. Van Sise's exhibit will be on display starting in October. The guiding question for today's panel is, what is the potential of visual art to raise awareness about endangered languages? And to help us answer this question, we've invited three wonderful visual artists and activists to join us: B.A. Van Sise, Lokosh, and Ruben Shimonov. I'm going to tell you their bios so that you know who you're working with today. And then we're each going to do presentations of our art, and then we'll have a conversation, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. If you do have questions, I recommend holding them till the end, but if you want to put them in the Q&A, you can click Q&A and enter your question there. So B.A. Van Sise is an author and photographic artist with 3 monographs: the visual poetry anthology Children of Grass with Mary Louise Parker, Invited to Life with Neil Gaiman, and On the National Language with Delana Studi. He is a winner of the Anthem Award for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, the Lascaux Prize for Nonfiction, and the Independent Book Publishers Awards Gold Medal. Ruben Shimonov is an educator, community builder, and artistic leader passionate about Jewish diversity. Born in Uzbekistan, Ruben is the American Sephardi Federation's National Director of Sephardi House and Young Leadership, and the founding executive director of the Sephardic Mizrahi Q Network. Ruben uses his multilingual Arabic, Hebrew, and Persian calligraphy to build Muslim-Jewish interfaith bridges and spark conversations about multiculturalism. Lokosh, also known as Joshua D. Hinson, is a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation. A fluent speaker of Chickasaw and an award-winning artist, he holds a Bachelor's of Fine Arts degree in painting from Abilene Christian University, a master's degree in Native American art history from the University of New Mexico, and a PhD in Native language revitalization from University of Oklahoma. He makes art on the Chickasaw Nation Reservation in Ada, Oklahoma. And Hinson, whose Chickasaw name Lokosh translates as gourd, is of the Imatapo House group, their lean-to people, and Kowishto Panther clan. So welcome to all of our guests today. I'm going to start by sharing some information about language reclamation. And I'm going to share my screen here. Hold on one second. Got to pull up the right PowerPoint. Okay. There it is. Okay. Well, many of the world's languages are now critically endangered. And the question is, how do we respond to this language shift and language endangerment? Wesley Leonard of the Miami tribe, who has done research on his own tribe's language efforts, distinguishes between two approaches, two responses to language endangerment. He calls them language revitalization on the one hand and language reclamation on the other hand. He characterizes language revitalization as direct language measures, like creating new speakers. And then language reclamation, in contrast, is a larger effort by a community to set associated goals in response to community needs and perspectives. And I think of language reclamation as often a more realistic approach to language endangerment than language revitalization, because often communities aren't going to be able to, or even have interest in creating many new speakers, in changing the patterns of intergenerational transmission. But they often do have an interest in engaging with the languages and in incorporating the language into the environment. And so there are many aspects to language reclamation, but two that I would like to focus on are post-vernacular engagement and ethno-linguistic infusion. Jeffrey Chandler created this term post-vernacular engagement based on his research about Yiddish use in contemporary American society and beyond. And he talks about post-vernacularity as privileging symbolism, the symbolism of a language over communicating meaning. So, for example, the ways that Yiddish is used in art, in music, festivals, Yiddish loanwords within English. And I talk about the concept of ethno-linguistic infusion as community leaders incorporating fragments of their group language into a different dominant language of interaction in order to foster ideological links. And what do I mean by ideological links? I mean that an individual should feel connected to the group and to the language, and should see the connection between the group and the language. And this can happen with songs, chants, signs, like, for example, putting up a label on a chair that says chair in that language, games, loan words, metalinguistic conversation, that is conversation about the language. Now, all of these processes are important in the language reclamation process. And this is an image that the Jewish Language Project created to lay out, to outline the work of the Jewish Language Consortium in documenting endangered Jewish languages. You can't document them if people don't want to document them or don't think it's important to document them. And so you have to raise awareness about the language and reduce the stigma of the language. And then you do the research and you make the research accessible. And based on those resources, on videos and dictionaries and grammars, you can educate in the language and engage with the language. So ethnolinguistic infusion can help with any of these, but especially with raising awareness. Let me show you some examples of how we're doing that at the Jewish Language Project. We create fun facts that we post on social media. And here you see how we're using visual art to help us in this process of raising awareness about Jewish languages. Here are some ones that we created, for example, about Ladino and Bukharian. And here are some other ones we created. This one uses the work of Ruben Shimonov about Farsi's use of a gender-neutral third-person pronoun, and then a phrase in Jewish Neo-Aramaic. Some of them are about the language in general, and some of them are about specific words or expressions. We also have many graphics that use visual art or graphic design to demonstrate Jewish linguistic diversity and raise awareness that Jews around the world have spoken many languages. Here are some ones we've created using words for peace and high holiday greetings. Or for the holiday that recently passed, Passover, we have holiday greeting and a map of how the Passover food charoset is called in various Jewish languages. And we're currently in the Omer. Today is day 40 of the Omer, the period of counting between Passover and Shavuot. And you can see this, we created graphics for each day of the Omer to count it in a different Jewish language. And several Jewish schools have printed out have posters of the Omer in these many languages. And students can just, if they get bored in class, look up and stare at the Omer poster and learn about all these different Jewish languages. Now, we're not the only ones that do this. Many people have created art using multiple languages, not just Jewish, multiple languages to demonstrate the world's linguistic diversity. For example, here's a mural created by an artist named Asim Hussein called Champion for Life. And you can see that it incorporates the word for read in many different languages from around the world. So then just here are some examples of post-vernacularity, which can also influence anything on this image, but especially engagement. And we see this in many artistic and cultural domains, especially literature. You have adult literature like Cantica, and children's literature like Buen Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom, and Tia Fortuna's New Home that incorporate Ladino into a primarily English book. And then you also have TV and theater in various Jewish languages. Here's a brief clip from a Jewish Neo-Aramaic theater in Israel. Okay, just brief clips here because I want to get to the visual art. And then here's a brief clip of a song that the Jewish Language Project commissioned from Galit Dardashti in Judeo-Esfahani, which is a language she does not speak, but her grandparents spoke. And then here is a an animated video by Shosh Yusufov of a Juhuri lullaby with her beautiful animations. So here we go. So let's now turn to some other visual art. Here is a photograph by Becky Behar called Fadario y Fortuna from her exhibit Tu que Vivas, where the photographs engage with the Ladino language. And you see how here in this visual art, it engages with a phrase, but then also with some visual images of the language. Another example is Lenore Mizrahi Cohen's work. And this one is from her exhibit or her collection Al-Amthal, which is a Judeo-Syrian Arabic phrase book represented in art, in visual art. And so this one is called A Donkey is Restrained by His Reins, a Person by His Tongue. So this one is calligraphic art, similar to what we're going to see from Ruben Shimonov in a little bit. And then I will just end with a brief video message by Laura Mandel from the Jewish Arts Collaborative, one of the co-sponsors of today's event.
Hello, everybody. Shalom. I'm Laura Mandel, Executive Director of the Boston-based Jewish Arts Collaborative. And while we can't be with you in person right now, we are delighted to be a partner with the Jewish Language Project on this program and many others because we share such a powerful belief in the opportunity the arts present to connect us all and to spark really important and challenging conversations today. So for the last few years, we have run a program that is called Be the Change. It's a Tzedakah-inspired public art movement that has intentionally engaged more than 40 different artists of diverse backgrounds across the country in presenting their view of a more just and connected world through the creation of these larger-than-life tzedakah boxes. And specifically, right now, we are so proud that one of the pieces that's on display in Orange County is by artist Emily Bowen Cohen, who some of you may know is a California-based illustrator and artist who identifies as indigenous and as Jewish. And so her piece is exploring that intersection. We're also really proud that artist Nayana Lafond, who's based on the East Coast, was one of our Be the Change artists in 2022, and she created a piece that referenced her own indigenous and Jewish background with a piece that she called Zun Gidee, which is actually an Ojibwe word, which means she or he or they are brave, speaking to the outsized issue of domestic violence within the indigenous community and across the U.S. So as you hear from the name of Zun Gidee and the work that Emily is doing and so many others within the J-Arts Network, we are so proud to be supporting contemporary artists who are creating work that harkens back to these important indigenous and native languages, which can be so beautifully represented through the arts. So we're proud to be a part of this work. Thank you all for putting on this program, and we hope to talk to you soon. Thanks.
And here are the images that she referenced. This is the Tzedakah box by Emily Cohen Bowen. And also Emily is the author of Two Tribes, which is a graphic novel that incorporates elements of Muskogee and Hebrew and Yiddish. And Nayana Lafond, this is the installation that she referenced as well. So thank you so much. And I'm now going to turn it over to our panelists to share their work with us. So our first up, we have B.A. van Sise presenting images from his exhibit on the national language. Take it away, B.A.
All right, hello everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm here in New York City. So let me see here. I hope my screen is showing. So I've spent the last about 3 years working on a project called On the National Language, which is something perhaps a little bit less on the ground in a certain way than what you're going to hear from Lokosh, what you're going to hear from Ruben. But essentially, my background is that I've got a degree in visual arts and in modern languages. And I grew very interested in the idea of creating interest both inter and intra-community about endangered language revitalization. Now, the work that I do is primarily about the intersection of language and visual art. My first book was about poetry. My second is about interviews with Holocaust survivor refugees in America. With this one, in this case, I reached out to an absolute ton of endangered language revitalizers around the country, starting from about the beginning of 2021. When I started the project, it wasn't what it turned into. When I began it, I'd had this idea because I like to tell the story, it's funny in a certain way and said another. I had this idea from a radio interview that I had heard. I was driving my nephew to the Cherokee Cultural Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I heard an interview on the radio with Dwayne Johnson, and he was talking about the success he had. I think he was promoting movie Moana, but he was talking about how he had all this success, but it was still, there was a hole in him because he had never actually really learned, embraced, taken on the Samoan language that he inherited from his mother, and he still felt that absence in him, and started thinking more and more about it. And when I originally started the project, it was about this sort of very narrow and kind of slightly, I don't want to say colonialist view of photographing, quote, the last speakers of these languages. And I realized pretty damn early on that wasn't where the story was. As I got into it, after doing only a few images, reaching out to only a few people, I began to realize that the story in these languages and sort of showing off some of the beauty and the poetry in them wasn't necessarily in the history, but in the future, that there were all these people, especially who were young revitalizers on the ground, people who were facing the concerns that all endangered language lovers face in bringing them to new generations, preserving them from former generations, etc. And the process was pretty simple. It's what you hopefully see on your screen right now, which was, let me just make sure everyone can see, and no one's yelling at me that you can't see. No one's yelling at me, great. So it began fairly simply. I had to reach out to people within these communities and say, hey, listen, I'm doing this thing. Fundamentally, I want to raise awareness, and it's about endangered language speakers of all varieties in America. And the way I defined an American endangered language was as if the majority of the speakers of this language live in the United States. So naturally, by dint of that, there's a tremendous amount of Native American language revitalizers, but also, as you see on your screen right now, there's Amish folks, there's Germanic language speakers, there's African diaspora speakers. I met with people who speak Gullah and Afro-Seminole Creole and Louisiana Creole. There's several, depending how you want to define it, between 3 and 5 Judaic languages. Sat down with these folks and said, listen, I want to make a sort of little visual poem. And I know I'm a stranger, I know this sounds crazy, but would you come and help me do something to, if nothing else, make this more interesting? So I met with folks who speak Lakota, who speak Pennsylvania Dutch, and I love telling the story because I spent a couple of days milking cows at this guy's farm because the Amish don't allow for photography, and it took a little bit of time to convince them to be a cool thing to do. I met with Mohawk language revitalizers. I met with Mosiah Salazar Bukharian in Arizona, who I think is actually at the conference that Lokosh is at right now in Arizona. Traveled all around the country, meeting with folks and saying, hey, what's an idea of something that's visually poetic, ideally something that doesn't translate into English very well, it shows off a little bit of the beauty. Let's try and find a way to interpret this visually in the way that makes it feel largest to people who might experience it. Now, the people who I want to experience it are both folks inside these communities and folks outside these communities for 2 reasons. The first is that fundamentally, right now, we're stopped on Amber Hayward, who is a woman who was a tremendous facilitator of this project for me, introduced me to so many interesting people, but also is fighting this tremendous uphill battle. She's a young woman. She's in the Pacific Northwest in Tacoma. And what her big goal in life is to get young people engaged with the language. And so I wanted to be able to show young folks, hey, here's somebody else who's kind of in your peer set who is doing this, who's learning the language, who's working on it. The little power that I have in life, such as it is that I can put together a museum exhibition, I can put together a book, I can take topics that are of interest and importance to me and bring them to a larger stage. So here's a way to create work that people within these communities will see because, hey, it's cool when it gets a larger attention and it gets whatever it gets. But also, more importantly, if I asked 1,000 people in a random poll, 999 of them have never heard of the language that Amber's trying to revitalize, which is the Shotsi. Now, there's language everybody's heard of. You've got Laura Tovey representing Navajo right next to her, but for the most part, a lot of these languages are not known to the general public. And when they are known, if you're talking about, for instance, some of these bigger languages, there's a perception that a lot of these languages are extinct, which is both wrong and misguided. I think most people in this country think that there's nobody around who still speaks Chalagi. There's nobody around who still speaks Chickasaw. There's nobody around who speaks X or Y or Z. And it's a great way to illustrate, hey, this is something that's worth your attention. Because, yeah, with the ones that you are familiar with, there's also the ones that you're not. Now, the way that I can do this, I'm not going to go in on the ground and teach anybody how to speak Kiowa, right? But what I can do is illustrate, hey, here's somebody cool who's doing this. Try and create some larger interest in it. And I think especially when you talk to two other artists who are on the panel today, you're going to see the same thing. It's a way to create interest and engagement. The hardest part about language revitalization is getting people started on it because it is hard. It is something that people feel is daunting. So showing folks who've done it, folks who are younger, like Sarah de Herrera in Oklahoma, where they start out because they're interested in it and they're willing to see it through. It's a great way to sort of create that interest. And the way that I can do that, the way that Ruben can do that, the way that Lokosh can do that, the way that a lot of artists who are working with language can do that right now is by saying, well, gee, hey, howdy, isn't this cool? Isn't this interesting? When a person looks at a newspaper, the way that they engage with an article, 999 times out of 1,000 is they are going to look at the images first, and whatever speaks to them, that's the sizzle that you hope is going to get them interested in the steak. So for my part, I guess what I'm trying to do is create images to start conversations, sometimes challenging ones, and to create sort of a desire for people to sort of dig into that steak. And it was a hard project. Believe it or not, hard to get access to Hollywood sign. Hard to get access to the Crazy Horse Monument. But fundamentally, the goal, the hope is that somebody out there sees this and they're in Los Angeles and they're a young person, perhaps of a Tongva background, perhaps not. And they see it and they go, well, isn't this cool? Isn't this beautiful? Maybe I should go crack a book. Maybe I should go take a class. In my own case, I don't identify as Native, but I have a tiny, tiny little sliver of Native heritage. And just doing this project and meeting all of these incredible people got me to start engaging with that language, even if it's hard, even if it's incredibly challenging and often intimidating, because I just met all these people who are doing this beautiful work. And it was hard to meet them and see them and know them and not say, well, if they're doing it, why the heck don't I try to? And hopefully somebody else out there does that as well. Hopefully they see these languages as something that can be hopefully beautiful, hopefully poetic, and hopefully personal to them. Anyway, that is in fact my ramble, and I will return power of all kinds back to Sarah.
Great, thank you so much, BA. Now we turn to Ruben Shimonov.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm going to share my screen right now. Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for this opportunity. One moment, please. Wonderful. Okay, the screen, you can see it, right, Sarah?
Well, we just see a blank screen right now.
Yes, yeah, that's,
okay.
That's great, yeah. So I want to briefly talk about my connection to the language of my community, which we call Bukhari or Bukharian or Judeo-Tajik, and the way in which I have engaged with my Bukharian identity and the language of my community through visual arts. And to begin that conversation, I always like to bring into the space my ancestors, because I am standing on the shoulders of these giants. And so this is actually a photo of my family in Tashkent, Uzbekistan in 1903. Over 120 years ago. And so I bring them and their heritage and their stories into the space, bringing the past into the present, because that intergenerational connection is what inspires so much of my artistic work, my leadership work, and my educational work. And just for those who might not know, when I talk about Bukharian Jews, I'm talking about Jews with deep and ancient roots in Central Asia, which is a region in the heart of the Asian continent at the crossroads of East Asia, South Asia, the Middle East, and Russia. And all of those influences are felt in our culture, in terms of cuisine, in terms of attire, and in terms of language. I was born here in Tashkent, and my family comes from other parts of Uzbekistan and also Afghanistan and Iran, because historically, this was part of what we could call today the greater Persian world, and Bukharian Jews are part of the greater Judeo-Persian world that also connects us to the history of Jews in Afghanistan, in Iran, in Azerbaijan. And this, again, this connection to the greater Persian-speaking world informs a lot of my art. As I said, the language that we speak is a distinct Jewish dialect of the Eastern variant of Farsi, which is known as Tajik, and our Jewish dialect or variant, what we call Bukharian, or scholars call it Judeo-Tajik. I also want to quickly zoom in on some of the art and architecture and the visual treasures of my part of the world, which again has informed a lot of my own art. So some of the most beautiful Islamic architecture in the world is found in Central Asia, in my opinion, in cities like Bukhara and cities like Samarkand, where Jews have lived for centuries and centuries. These are two photos of that I just showed right now of Poi Kalon, a beautiful site of Islamic architecture in Bukhara. And this is me visiting that site last year. For the first time in 30 years, I went back with my mom to Uzbekistan. We moved when I was 6 years old. We actually came as refugees seeking asylum. And this was me going back the place where I was born and the place where my ancestors have lived for so long. Here's another beautiful site in Samarkand. This is a complex of different madrasas, of different Islamic academies. And again, this art, the visual aesthetics of this architecture really influenced our art, and also, again, it linguistically influenced us. Persian was being spoken, and we had our own dialect, and also it was influenced by Turkic languages that were in the region that influenced our dialect, and also the Arabic of the region that came by way of Islam spreading into the region. Arabic influenced Farsi, and it influenced Judeo-Persian and Bukharian as well. And this is me at that same site again last year, visiting Registan. On that same trip, I was also able to visit a beautiful historic synagogue of Samarkand called the Gumbaz Synagogue. Gumbaz means dome. And you can see here again visually the way in which the broader architecture of the region influenced our architecture. But also you see here Hebrew and its importance and its centrality in this space and in our identity, which is why Judeo, like many other Jewish languages, Judeo-Tajik Bukharian was written in Hebrew script. It was a variant of Persian written in Hebrew script. So again, holding those layers all in the language that we spoke and wrote in. And on that same trip, I was blessed to also go to the home of the U.S. ambassador to Uzbekistan, Jonathan Hennick, whose home actually houses 16 pieces of my art as part of the State Department's Art in Embassies program. And that was a very, really emotional and incredible thing to be able to see, to have my art be featured. And as a Central Asian Jewish American Bukharian immigrant, to go back to Uzbekistan and to go to the home of the ambassador and have my art be there in front of the American flag in Uzbekistan as also a proud Bukharian Jew. All of that was really touching and showed me the power of art and in my case calligraphy in telling our stories and in also creating bridges. That same trip is when I actually led a calligraphy workshop with a whole group of Uzbek Muslim students. And again, this is actually my calligraphy. I would say it accomplishes two things. It's a way to raise awareness about Jewish languages, both of my community and also other parts of the greater Middle East and North Africa and Central Asia. For many centuries, many of us spoke variants of Arabic and of Persian. So it's really about increasing that awareness, but also it's about creating bridges between different communities. Particularly for me, I'm very passionate about creating Muslim-Jewish interfaith bridges because my Jewish culture really developed against the backdrop of Islamic societies. So this was really special to be able to do that. And the couple of minutes I have left, I'm going to show you a few pieces, but in driving home the point even further about how my calligraphy really is a reflection of the different layers of our history as Jews in Central Asia, which was this crossroads of different cultures. I turned to this beautiful dictionary, which is actually featured on the Jewish Languages Project website. I shared some of these photos with Dr. Benor, but I turned to this multilingual dictionary published over a century ago by a Bukharian rabbi, actually Shalom Babajan Pinchaso, and it's a 6-language dictionary that features Hebrew, Persian, Russian, Ladino, Arabic, and Turkish. And again, it shows just the way in which our experiences and our identities were multi-layered, and we spoke different languages, and that in itself was a very Bukharian experience. And so what my art does is it brings onto one page, onto one surface, different languages. It juxtaposes them and allows these languages to really speak to each other and dance on the page. And the languages that I bring into the space are Hebrew, Persian, and Arabic, all of which have played important roles in the history of my community, of the broader Persian Jewish community, and of the greater Sephardi Mizrahi community. So, and these pieces that I'm going to very quickly show you are actually the ones that are featured in the are exhibited in the home of the ambassador to Uzbekistan, the U.S. ambassador to Uzbekistan. So this image here is the word blessing in Hebrew, which is beracha, and in Farsi, which is barakat, which comes from the Arabic baraka, which comes from the Hebrew beracha. It's all interconnected, and I love to, when I create these images, I really want them to be like seamlessly interconnected, as if you can't remove one from the other. Here's another image of the word ruh, which in Farsi and also in Judeo-Persian and Tajiki we use for, Bukhari we use for spirit. and it's related to the Hebrew word ruach, right, which then in Arabic became ruh, and then also influenced the Persian. Another one, this is the prophet Abraham, right, where, you know, this is a way for me to talk about the Abrahamic faiths, and in Farsi and in Arabic, it's Ibrahim. Ibrahim in Arabic, Ibrahim in Farsi. Another one here, which is the word wisdom, chokhmah in Hebrew, and in Persian, it's hekmat or hikmat, which comes from the Arabic hikmah, which comes from the Hebrew chokhmah. Another one, akhdut, which in Hebrew means unity, wahdat in Farsi, again by way of Arabic, also means unity. We see a pattern here. I'm just going to show a couple more, and then I'll wrap up here. This is kind of where I'm going. My new endeavors are focusing, meditating on words that are, again, cognates, like words that are related to each other, but putting them in these repetitive patterns to almost kind of allow a person to get lost in it, to be in a trance. So this is the Hebrew word ahava, and in Persian and also in Bukharian, we have a word mohabbat, which means love. And it's that word repeated many times. Another example of it here, again, seamlessly connected. Assalamu alaikum, shalom aleichem, peace upon you all. Another version of that with salam and shalom, the words for peace. And the last ones that I'll show you here are even more related to my family and to my kind of my identity. So this is my grandfather's name in Hebrew, which is Haim, and his Bukharian name was the Persian version of the word life, which is Hayat. And I wrote it here in the Perso-Arabic script against the backdrop of an ikat. This is a special kind of textile pattern that is very unique to Central Asia, and it's a really beautiful pattern. So I wanted to put it against that backdrop. Then we have this word, which is Bukhara, right? I was speaking to you about this important city in Bukharian Jewish history, and I wrote it here. This is Hebrew, but this is actually technically very much Bukharian. It's Judeo-Tajik, because I wrote it in exactly the way in which we would write this word using the Hebrew script, but the Persian language. So this is very much specifically Bukharian Judeo-Tajik. Another example of that, the city Samarkand, we also saw images from that. And inside of it, again, written in, you can say Hebrew, but really it's Bukharian and Judeo-Tajik, that same city. And my whole intention with this was I wanted to create a pattern that you might see actually on, you know, different mosques in Samarkand, these beautiful mosques, and you would see the Perso-Arabic, you would see these designs, but I added a layer to it by putting the Bukharian there. And then the final piece here is a nod to, or an homage to the classical music, a musical tradition of Central Asia that Bukharian Jews were very much an important part of, and really helped perpetuate and maintain it. And that's the musical genre known as Shash Maqam. And so, which means 6 modes. And so I wrote it here in the Perso-Arabic script, but then I also wrote it in in the Hebrew script that is used to write Judeo-Persian, to write Bukharian. Thank you so much for your time. I know I went a little bit over, but this is just a little glimpse into how art is a way that I have reclaimed and reconnected to my heritage, to my community, and to my ancestral language.
Thank you so much, Ruben. We now turn to Lokosh.
Right. Are you guys seeing the correct slide with this painting of skulls on it?
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. All right. Chukma sol chufot Lokosh, Chickasaw, Magnitica, Chibahikilikat, Kanikash Bayokoke, Chimashle. My name's Lokosh, it means gourd. I'm really thankful to be here with you guys today. I'm a Chickasaw person, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of language in my work. This is a painting that is in my home. It's a favorite in my family, and it's not allowed to be sold. And it's meaningful in particular ways. Maybe it's not perhaps the most favorite of my personally my work, but I want to get into that in a moment here. I really appreciate the image that Ruben showed us a moment ago of his ancestors. This is all the generations of Chickasaw women leading to me. These first three women here, you can see their name was Mentahoya or Mentohoyo. The first woman would have been born in the mid to late 17th century. They were all monolingual speakers of Chickasaw. Chickashanumpa is our word for our language. It means Chickasaw language, or the language that belongs to the Chickasaws. These next folks, Mariah here was born in Chickasaw Nation in Mississippi prior to our forced removal in 1837. In my case, our family removed in May of 1838 and arrived in Indian Territory, which today is Oklahoma, where our reservation is based. The following three generations were also born into the Chickasaw Nation in Indian Territory prior to statehood in 1907. This is my great-grandmother. She was the third in her line to attend boarding school at Bloomfield or Carter Seminary, that for a time, although it was administered by the Chickasaw Nation itself, it was an active agent in the discontinuation of Chickasaw as a spoken language of the home. It was primarily a school designed to turn Chickasaw women, young girls, into women that were modeled after Western, white, Eastern folks. And it was remarkably successful. The last fully fluent speaker in my family was Granny Meade here, who was born in the mid-19th century and died in 1938. This is my grandmother that I called Mimi. She was also born in Oklahoma after statehood. This is my mother, Charla, who was born in North Texas, and then ultimately myself. Because we're matrilineal people, this is how I get my clan and my house, an unbroken line of Chickasaw women as far back as we can go. So I want to speak briefly about this piece. I can't help but think of reflecting on both BA's work and Ruben's work. In our case, we are not people of the book. We are not people that wrote down our language. Our language, our history, our culture, everything that makes us who we were was solely transmitted orally. And then secondarily, long before we emerged as unique and independent peoples. For example, the split between the Chickasaws and the Choctaws and our other relatives. We descend from the mound building peoples who, while they didn't have written language, used this incredible visual vocabulary to communicate things that were of importance to them. So in this case, you have an image that's a hybrid in a certain instance. You have a woman named Catherine Willman. Her name was Tontna in the language, which means she brings it there. She was a bilingual speaker, but as close to a monolingual speaker as one might get. Very limited proficiency in the language. She died just a couple of years ago. Her parents were a member of a syncretist, nativist Christian movement called the Four Mothers Society. And in the case of the Chickasaws, we had a prophecy that if the language was lost, the world would end. And this is, in fact, the title of this piece, Chikasha de Manampadin Kanigma Nitakat Shtayupachi. The end of the world, in this case, is rendered as Judgment Day. As I mentioned, they were nativists, but strongly Christian. And so this sort of end time prophecy was something that was incorporated into their religious practice. And so as a visual artist myself, and as a fluent speaker of the language who learned to speak Chickasaw as a young adult, What I did in this case was to combine these two traditions, this visual tradition from Moundville, Alabama, in this case, the skull motif that was discovered on a piece of funerary pottery, speaking about the movement of the soul over space, into the sky, over the Milky Way, and into an afterlife. I combined that image, that death image, with this prophecy. And in using our traditional colors of red, white, and black that denote life, death, medicine, war, any number of things, what I was trying to do was create an image that reminded us of our obligations to speak our language, reminded us of our long history as a people, that though we may have changed through centuries, we are still fundamentally the same people expressing things in new and old ways simultaneously. I've been a visual artist for as long as I can remember. You know, as a child, I wanted to be a professional artist when I grew up, and my career trajectory was such that I actually began doing language revitalization work professionally in 2007. And this was some 8 or 9 years after I began to incorporate the language into my work. This is a more recent piece, and you can't see, but in this case, the title of the piece, which is the case in almost all of my work, it'll have a Chickasaw title. It's Hopai, which means a prophet or a seer, someone who can see the future. In this case, it's a representation of an 18th century religious leader who was responsible for green corn, which is the most significant ceremony in our ceremonial cycle. The corn that had become ripened would be eaten at that time. A sacred fire that was kept burning throughout the year was extinguished and relit by this Hopai. And so even if it's something fairly small, like the name of this individual, Hopai, I inscribe it on all the works. There's a lot of religious symbolism here, in particular white. You'll notice the subtle use of red, a Mississippi landscape in the background. It relates to things that are deeply held within the language. But here I've chosen a visual representation as opposed to the visual representation of writing. These are two other examples. The name of this piece is Chickasaw Hataki Hotawa. That just means Chickasaw man and woman. These are representations of later ancestors from the 18th century that combined Western and native forms of regalia in representing themselves to the world. This is a diptych. These are 4 by 4 feet, respectively. Here's a piece that I created during COVID, riffing off of the Uncle Sam image that you may or may not be familiar with. This says, Pia Mingo wants you to wash your hands. This was early in the pandemic. We thought that hand washing was something that we ought to be doing. And in this case, Pio Minko, or Hopai Minko, was a war prophet who rose to significance in the 18th century and led our people for a long time. He was an exceptionally talented leader. Here's another example I'm drawing from Mobilian imagery, again from Moundville, Alabama. It's Abika Okpolo, which is our word for COVID. It just means the terrible sickness. This is drawing on the symbolism of the 4 sacred directions, the cross-shaped sacred fire that I mentioned earlier. In this case, it's almost a memento mori, a death image that reminds us of what was happening at the time in 2020 when COVID was sweeping the world. You have the COVID virions here, the crossed bone symbols, the hand and eye, which is a constellation associated with Orion that appears at its lowest point on the horizon in the winter. That's where souls cross over onto the Milky Way. That's called the White Dog's Road, Ofi Tobi Ihina. and they make their way to the afterlife. So this is something that I was thinking about quite a bit during COVID. This work was created throughout the pandemic. This piece, Itin ho pocket itin monopoly, means they are far from one another, yet speaking. And you can see again the skull imagery, the COVID virions, this mask, and the hands, as well as the feet representing 6 feet of distance between the two characters. Here's another variation on a theme where you can see the skull motif is wearing a mask. Coincidentally, I actually went to Yale to present a presentation about this body of work, and I caught COVID for the first time. This was about the lack of ceremonial dancing during COVID. We put our grounds to sleep for the first time since the 1990s, and we didn't dance during the summer of 2020. Here's another example of language incorporated into the visual format. We have hotosko, which means he, she, it, or they are coughing. Here's something I did for our first responders and our medical practitioners. This just means the doctors are fighting the terrible disease. And this body position is based on a Mississippian shell gorget that would have been worn around the neck. And here's the piece that inspired it, a Mississippian warrior with a stone mace and the beheaded head of an enemy. Here's one on the World War II, we can do it, Iyamaka. It's one way to say we can do it in Chickasaw. And in this case, I have her masked, and she has traditional tattoos across her forearms, fingers, and then here on the screen on her arm, you can see Abika Pisachit. Our word for nurse means the one that looks after the ill, so that's what's tattooed there. Anytime you see a work that's inspired by somebody else's work, whether it be T.C. Cannon or in this case Miller, you'll also see the attribution in the title in addition to the Chickasaw. I did a series of pieces that were memorials for the number of people who had passed away on that particular date, 166,317. This is another memento mori with the imagery from Moundville, Alabama. It just simply says, remember that you will die. Here's one. It says, if you're alive, you should be happy about it. We have a skeleton figure here with a bowl of pishofa, which is a corn and pork stew. It's our national dish. An Indian taco, which is fry bread with a bunch of taco makings on it, and Mexican Coke, because I like Mexican Coke. And it was inspired by this piece, which was discovered in Turkey, if I'm not mistaken. And the text is something similar. I also did a lot of work with images from maps and combining these historic period maps with skull imagery. This is Isla Confi, which means we survive or we are survivors. And you have within the image dates of historically significant outbreaks of disease within our communities. Also thinking about the way that these diseases were spread across towns, deriving the circular forms that denoted maps, and then how the diseases were brought from town to town. There's an original map that I was referencing throughout this smaller sub-series of work. Coincidentally, this is the only representation of a human form by a Chickasaw artist prior to the 20th century. You can see him leading his horse there on a friendly path to an allied town. And a representation of this map at the Cultural Center. Some other work devoted to Fritz Scholder. Instead of a beer can, it's a can of Spam. Phony, this character from Moundville appears here. Some other examples. But again, you see some common themes. Obviously, this was COVID-related work, but there's language throughout, both visual and written, imagery and written. This is a representation of the White Dogs Road that I mentioned earlier. The constellation itself, you can see there, the center. And then another example of that constellation. Here's the constellation tattooed on someone's forearm.
I think we have time for one or two more.
You got it. The last thing I'll say about this work that grew out of COVID, it's just like the rest of my body of work, language is shot throughout. In our traditional system of belief, animals cause diseases and plants provide the cures. So in this case, it's all ledger paper from the late 19th, early 20th centuries, representations of traditionally significant plants along with their name in the language. This is a COVID, sort of the COVID virus envisioned as a hybrid animal-human. And then finally, a painting that's in the living room of a good friend of mine, Chila Chica no Funga, Remember That You'll Die. That's it for me. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to all of you. And let's bring all the panelists back on the screen now. We're going to have a conversation. I noticed some common themes here. One is hybridity or bivalence, the idea that there are multiple languages and systems of imagery referenced simultaneously in all three of these artists' work. I also noticed connections between language and religion. Also, it's interesting how there are differences between languages that were historically primarily oral or also written in how art is used in language reclamation for those languages. And finally, the idea that referencing language in art has the capability of raising awareness not only about the existence of a language, but about specific aspects of the language. And so now I'd like to open it up to the panelists. Do you have anything that you want to say that will about anyone else's work that you just heard or saw?
I'd actually like to speak to your comment about the idea of it being the hybridization that you see in the work. That's a natural result of any work that has to deal with language. If you're talking about Judaic languages, you're talking mostly about Pidgin and Creole languages. You're talking about languages that have been driven through other cultures and diaspora. If you're talking about Yiddish, you're talking about German. If you're talking about Ladino, you're talking about Spanish. So naturally, the cultures that people live among are going to affect them. That's the natural course of the world of culture. None of us live on an island. If you're talking about the Chickasaw, you're talking about the Spanish, you're talking about the English, you're talking about modern culture, you're talking about the folks that dress our lives. So naturally you're going to have that sort of meeting point. I doubt there's, no matter what anyone wants to say in their myth making, I doubt there's any language that actually exists in our world as a true isolate anymore. There's nothing that hasn't been affected at all. And so that's natural. And I think also talking about art, the history of art is fundamentally, in a charming way, theft. Everyone is affected by the artists that come before them. You had Lokosh talking about canon, right? If you're talking about my work, you're talking about the photographers who inspired me. You're talking about Arnie Newman and whatnot. So you're going to have artists who affect you. And that's the same kind of transfers that you have through language. I've met this. I went to India and I like the word pajama. I'm taking it back with me, right? Whatever that might be, that's a natural aspect of art as well. So naturally, you're going to see that sort of parallel road that goes between them, between saying, well, I live amongst the Germans and I'm going to take influence from the German language. And I'm a photographer and I like Philippe Halsman, so naturally I'm going to include a bit of Philippe Halsman in my work. I think those are exactly and perfectly parallel words. Language is, as everyone is called, and probably everyone watching it knows, an art form itself.
Yeah, and you could call it theft or you could call it citation.
I could, but I'll call it theft.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm with BA. Good, good artists borrow, great artists steal. I mean, even like Ruben went before me, and if there's nothing that says this is an amazing piece of work, like I have an idea. Ruben gave me an idea. How can I rip him off? That's a good work, right? Yeah.
But also there's something that's really important about, right? Taking these influences that you have, be they linguistic influences, be they artistic influences. So take someone like Ruben. Ruben comes from a very, very long, a tremendous long line of calligraphers in the sort of three main cultures that he works with. Calligraphy is not something new, but he says, okay, I'm interested in this thing. I'm interested in these color palettes. I'm interested in these languages. I'm interested in calligraphy. And I have strong feelings about this. My mother was a calligrapher, so I care a lot about calligraphy. And he says, okay, I have these traditions. How can I make it my own? How can I draft these for the purposes of this beautiful mixed culture I come from, about carrying the legacies of my ancestors? Here's grandpa's name in a couple different languages. Here's my status as a guy who's born in Uzbekistan, lives in the States, knows lots of folks who aren't Jewish, knows lots of folks who aren't Muslim, knows this and this and whatnot. And that's where the poetry is in it. That's where you find the path forward. If you're trying to stick to, you're talking about revitalization versus reclamation before, in language you see the exact same thing. If you talk about perhaps the greatest linguistic revitalization project in the history of the world, you're talking about, there's no way around it, Hebrew. And if they had said, we want to bring back strictly biblical Hebrew, they would have failed. They said, no, that doesn't exist anymore. We have a much wider need of vocabulary these days. We have all these other cultures, all these traditions that have affected us. We need a word for this and this and this and this, and we can borrow from here and here and here. And finding ways to create on top of what we already have is key to artistic revitalization. It's key to linguistic revitalization. If I was talking to somebody here who specializes in Chickasaw, which thank God I'm not, we'd be talking about the fact that you constantly have to invent words to coin concepts that perhaps the ancestors didn't need to express. I know Lokosh pretty well. We've actually become friends since I photographed him about 3 years ago. And one day he calls me up and he says, hey, listen, I need you to explain Hanukkah to me so that I can invent a word for Hanukkah, or whatever holiday it was, in Chickasaw, because I've got a little kid on the res who is part Jewish and part Chickasaw, and I'm trying to find a way to be inclusive. We create new necessities. We create new paths forward. And if you try and stick to the past, and this is why revitalization works so well, you're never going to get there. You have to be able to be adaptable.
Mm-hmm.
Ruben, you want to respond?
I mean, it was said so beautifully by my two new friends here. One thing that I would just add or echo is that, so like for me, right, I intentionally began my presentation with honoring my, Lokosh, thank you for observing that, for honoring my ancestors and for bringing the past into the present, both of my particular community, but also the context in which we lived, right? I showed architecture that was outside the Jewish world, and there was a reason behind that. I think, naming, not only is it about, paying homage and respect and honor to the influence, to all the things that have influenced us, but it brings us into that conversation. It allows us to, and I think that's what art does, and also language and language development does, is it's part of an ongoing conversation. Like we think about, for example, even like the Talmud, right, which has these different sages that are speaking to each other as if they're contemporaries, and they're not always, right? But this is the power of that. So it's both a way to kind of, for me, it's a humbling thing, but it also then it brings me into that conversation and is really empowering. And then in recognizing, the context and the way that I fit into this broader story, I feel actually liberated to then, as BA was saying, kind of make my own meaning of it, right? So it's not just, it's recognizing the past, but then it is moving it into the future in a way that feels compelling and meaningful to me. So for example, one thing I didn't mention was, you probably saw the art that I showed you was very like, the colors were very, it's like, pop art, I think they call it, right? It's very bright, and it's almost like the kind of colors you would see in, in comics, and that's intentional for me. It's one way that I'm kind of bringing it into the present and connecting it to other kind of aesthetic interests that I have. So I think when we recognize the way that we are in conversation with other artists, with our ancestors, with the cultures around us, it's again not just a way to honor that, but it allows us to have our place in that conversation and opens up new doors of creativity, because we're continuing literally and figuratively the conversation.
Well, I think, Ruben, that's a really important thing to that too, right? Because it's about making it part of yourself, but also accessible to the future. If Lokosh's ancestors in the Mississippi mounds looked at his work, even as their descendant, they'd say, well, maybe I don't necessarily recognize this. Elements of it, yes, but this is something new and different and strange to me, very figurative in a way that perhaps their own art back in time wouldn't have been. Your ancestors in Uzbekistan would be shocked by your bright neon color palette. They might recognize the language aspects of it. They might recognize some of the heritage of it. Same thing. My ancestors running around North Africa would go, what is this crazy horseshit that BA is making, right? And they might recognize that also, oh, there's elements of what we have and what our values are. And yes, there's descendancy in this also, but we are all possessed by the centuries in which we live, and hopefully thoughtful to the ones that we'll never know, the people who come after us, right? And so if you're an artist, you're always constantly thinking about legacy. If you're a linguist, you are too, right? If you are a linguist, you're thinking about, in ways small and large, what the language looks like after you. And that can be a mundane way. That can be, well, the kids now are saying Riz. Or it can be one day AI is going to have to figure out Chickasaw words, whatever it might be, right? And so you're still thinking about what that future looks like after you, and you try and steer it, as best you can. You try and steer it to the things that are durable, things like art, things like literature, things that last longer than conversations do. But you're always just kind of playing a game and do the best you can.
So I want to open it up to audience Q&A. So please put your questions in the Q&A section. And while we're waiting for that, I want to just mention, you mentioned AI just now. So I like to think of the Jewish Language Project as convening the greatest minds to come up with ways to harness the power of whatever they work on for the purpose of language reclamation. And we're doing that with AI. We're working on using AI for some aspects of language documentation. And I want to ask you, this set of great minds, what else can be done with visual art to assist with language reclamation? We've seen photography, we've seen calligraphy, we've seen painting with phrases from various languages. And what else? What else do you have in mind for the future that any artists who are watching our webinar can get inspired by?
I'm waiting for BA to jump in and start talking about AI.
I'm avoiding it like the plague. You've hit on the topic I hate most in the entire world, Sarah. So I'm going to
you started it,
and I'm going to hijack your conference.
I will say that when we began this work, our tribal governor, Governor Bill Anatobi, established the Chickasaw Language Revitalization Program in 2007. And one of the first efforts that we had to make was to bring the language back to prominence in the community. It's not to say it wasn't considered important. It had just been, I don't know, it'd been quieted in some ways. And one of the very first things we did was work with a very talented graphic designer named Ryan Redcorn, who's Osage. and we created a
love him.
logo. I love Ryan Redcorn. He created a logo, a visual vocabulary. We brought together references, as I had done before, from ancestral art with written Chickasaw. So all across the reservation, you see this particular color palette, you see the Sonoma logo, you see the shirts and the flashcards and the videos and everything we do. Like, that it's us doing this work, which I think was important. And at the same time, we started valorizing the efforts of Native speakers, assigning economic value to their speakerhood. That was part of the reason why we lost much of our language, was because English was the language of economic power. So you have this sort of multi-pronged effort, and those are just two aspects of the approach that Governor has asked us to do in bringing language back to prominence and making it accessible to all of our people worldwide. And you cannot diminish the importance of something as seemingly insignificant as a logo or a T-shirt or a video. It all moves us towards where we want to be. You can see a lot of this work at chickasawlanguage.com, chickasaw.tv, on all of my socials. There's a lot more than we can talk about in this limited period of time, but yeah, the visual has played it's a powerful part of our work since 2007.
Yeah, I think T-shirts. Oh, sorry, go ahead, BJ.
I want to ask Lokosh a question to which I already know the answer, but for the sake of the attendees today, I'm curious about the use of visual elements in the education initiatives that you have out there on this.
Yeah. So whether it would be like our flashcard sets, they're physical, handed out just to kids. They're also being turned into short form videos. We have a whole, we did an emoji project where we created emoji 2.0 riffs, but incorporating ancestral imagery in terms of how men and women would look. We have animated emoji videos on Instagram. I'm not sure if that's what BA was going for, but
it kind of is. I didn't know you had, because part of it is, right, you want this to feel cool. The language education works best when it's approached with young people, as young as possible, actually. The programs work best fundamentally. If you have little kids learning it, they're going to just pick up like sponges. I didn't know you had emojis, which is actually pretty great, because fundamentally, right, that's the hieroglyphics that people who are of a really good educational, linguistic education age receive it. So that's pretty great. I didn't know that. That's fun.
Yeah, it's the Chickasaw emoji app. It's on Apple and the Android or Google Play, whatever stores. Again, that was an idea we stole from an exceptional Haida artist whose name is escaping me right now, but we give them props. Email me and I'll give you their name. At any rate, yeah.
This is what so Lokosh likes to send me mail or a package every once in a while, and he'll write like an entire thing in Chickasaw, requiring me to translate it meticulously. So now you can just do it in emojis.
Right.
So I can translate it like I'm Carter in the pyramid.
Right.
And hope for the best.
Yeah.
Ruben, you want to weigh in on future possibilities for art?
Yeah, I think one thing that I have been leaning into, and I'm excited to do more of it, and I encourage others to do, is to embrace the possibilities that technology are offering us. And I think for artists, it's sometimes, I'll speak even for me, it's there is a resistance because I want to, keep things pure, right? And whatever that means. But the reality is art has always been dynamic, and not only art, but the way in which, like, the technologies that we use, the methods that we use to create art have always been dynamic, and new methods, were always a bit maybe controversial in the beginning. And I think right now we have, like, I think about the art that I create and the potential of taking it to another level through like digital means, right? So using, for example, Procreate, right, which is just an app that you can have on your iPad where the canvas is the screen and your finger or a stylus is the pen, and it's still your original work. But again, in the beginning for me, I was a little resistant. Like, is this am I not honoring, the past and the ancestors and all of that? But then I actually became part of a community of artists who are using this new approach. And with that, it's opening up so many things, because when something is, digital art, you can then print it on apparel, right? You can use laser printing and 3D printing and carve it out of wood. I'm working with a jewelry maker in using my art to create, my multilingual art to create like jewelry designs. The sky's the limit, really. There's so many new, another person I'm working with is actually on, putting some of this work on tote bags and on shirts, not in a way of making it like for me, it's very important. It's not about it like becoming commercialized, but it's a conversation starter, right? If you do it in an intentional way. And so I'm excited about what the future holds with technology, and little by little, I am leaning more into it, while still being, still a little bit hesitant, but understanding that with it, particularly if my goal is to engage more people, to make this more relevant, and to really speak to the people, to my community and beyond, then we have to, I think we should lean into new ways of engaging with our communities.
Thank you. We have a question for BA. How did you do that image with the person jumping into the water, where the water, it looks like she has already.
So this woman, it's a young woman, and she's actually an incredibly young person. I actually think that Lokosh knows her a little. Her name is Sarah de Herrera. She is out in Atoka, Oklahoma, I believe is the name of the town. And we talked about a concept. We talked about something that would be sort of visually appealing, and because you want to start conversations, you want exactly what's happened now. And it is actually real, with a caveat. I did not know her. I was some random guy who emailed her because I'd seen a lot of clips of music she does. She's a singer, and who sings primarily in Choctaw. And so I reached out to her, and she brought her whole large family to come make sure that I wasn't going to murder her, and I did not, happily for everyone. She had only started on her language journey when I first met her. With the promise, I told her, listen, I'll be very mad, and I'll have to throw you out of the book to show everything if you don't follow through on this, because she was just starting out on it. She grew up in California. They're just going back to Oklahoma. She just got her fluency certificate in Choctaw like a month and a half ago, very recently, actually. She messaged me, she's so excited. But anyway, so what it is this. It's 2 exposures. She jumped off a big dam ladder into the water. The water's real, so it's a lake she has on her property. She did jump in her full clothing. The picture you actually see is actually the second take, not the first, because she made a funny face going into the water in the first one. But yeah, we had her jump off the ladder, and she used the layered exposure and remove the ladder. It's actually very, very simple. But she worked at the time. We knew we had this idea. She wanted to show off the property. Talking about the fact that a lot of the Muskogean languages have very interesting concepts around both time and movement. And so we had this idea of trying to create a complex word out of the idea of water. And so she worked with the language instructor at the Cultural Center there in Oklahoma to sort of craft the most complex word we could to then create a concept around the idea of movement and water. And so, yeah, that's all. Fundamentally, it was just I met this perfectly strange stranger. Her entire family, full of big, beefy male relatives, were standing behind me, cautiously watching me have her toss herself several times into a lake.
Amazing. Okay, we have time for one more question, and this is for all of you. We only have 30 seconds for each of your responses. Tell us a little bit about the reception of your work and how it relates to language revitalization, language reclamation. Lokosh, you want to start with that one?
Okay. I guess people are into it. Yeah. I mean, in terms of like clients and people that are acquiring the work, but also how language is incorporated, into the work of doing revitalization, visually and otherwise. I don't know. It's very seamless. The visual work and the revitalization work is just one life. And I share the life with a whole bunch of other cool people that are doing the same thing.
Thank you. Ruben?
the words that come to mind are like embraced, being embraced, and bridge building and conversations, starting conversations. This has really been the feedback and the reactions. Is it's allowed me, first of all, to connect to so many wonderful people from around the world, and to me that is like an important power of art. Is it's part of this, no pun intended, like a universal language. Like that's what art is also. And so the connections I've built with other with folks from other cultures and communities, and particularly in the interfaith space, but also the beautiful connections I built with other Bukharian Jews who I don't know, and we don't know, contrary to what people might think, but we don't all know each other, and other Sephardi, Mizrahi, young Jews who are really excited about on our own terms, kind of reclaiming our languages. So it's conversation starters, and it's a feeling of this embracing feeling, and these powerful bridges that we're building.
I'm going to answer something you said quickly, Ruben. Sorry, I know you want to do spiels and pitches, but I want to talk to that for a second. Ruben, as an artist, your work always has a much longer reach than you think it does. I knew exactly who you were and the kind of work you did before we met on this conference, before I was told you were going to be on this, because the reality is the work gets seen and people know about it. So even though I'm not Bukhari, even though I'm not part of that community, I don't work in calligraphy, etc., people see the work either directly because they've interacted with it and you just don't know it, or by reputation. So that's the thing you should always keep in mind. So you are reaching people if you don't know, you're feeling and see it. So I wanted you to know that. To get back to Sarah's thing, Sarah started with a plug, so I'm going to end with a plug. As far as what the work does, the immediate plug part of this is that I've got a book that comes out in September, and I've got a beautiful, gorgeous, gigantic exhibition open at the Skirball on October 17th, curated by Vicky and Sarah and Michelle. But that's the immediate and tangible part of it, right? That's the part where there's an exhibition as a book, and that's cool. You get to see it. It gets to be physical to you and behind you and that kind of stuff. But the more important part is this. And I'm embargoed 5 ways from Sunday, and there's only limited things I can say about, because the exhibition is a book and I've got master's honors. It's kind of like being in Star Wars without the money or the fame. There's a really, really important thing to this. I've done these big projects, gotten big museum shows, etc. There is careful. There is absolutely nothing that I've ever done that has garnered as much attention as this project has. And I don't think that has anything to do with me. I wish it did. I wish I could say, oh, BA is so great. That's not what it is. There is something that resonates with people, I think, when you talk about the ways to make language interesting. Because everybody, I don't care who you are, I don't care if you're Native, if you're Jewish, if you're white, if you're Black, if you're an immigrant family, doesn't matter. Everyone has the experience of, my family used to have a language that I've lost, especially in this country. We have a habit of shedding our families like coats, right? And so there's something that's very real to that, where you can look at all these folks who maybe don't share your exact background, but who are doing stuff with it and finding ways to make it interesting. So that's where I think the rubber hits the road, and that's why I think that, without getting people who owe me mad at me, that's why I think I'm seeing so much resonance. And I think that's also why, for instance, every Native person who I've ever talked to in my freaking life knows Lokosh's work. I bet you that most of a Jewish audience knows Ruben's work. Same reason why. People see it and they go, oh, my grandpa had that, my great grandma had that, etc. And I want some of it back. So I think that's where the language gets appealing to people. I think that's where the art gets appealing to people. So that's where I think it's important. And that's the end of my spiel.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of the guests. And now I turn it over to Hannah Pressman to take us out with some announcements.
Hey. On behalf of the Jewish Language Project, I'd like to thank our wonderful panelists and everyone out there in the audience for joining us for today's conversation about visual art in Jewish and Native American language reclamation. A special thank you to our event co-sponsors, Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, American Sephardi Federation, Ayin Press, Jewish Arts Collaborative, Skirball Cultural Center, and 7,000 Languages. Here at the Jewish Language Project, we are committed to raising awareness of the linguistic diversity of Jewish communities around the globe. We believe that there is a world of history in every Jewish language, and every speaker has something to teach. The best place to find out about our research and programming is to visit our website at jewishlanguages.org. There you can view exhibit pages for 32 different Jewish languages, access free resources like the Jewish English Lexicon, and sign up for our mailing list. We're active on social media and post fun facts, buzzworthy language news, courses, and more. If you enjoy video content, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel for curated playlists, or check us out on TikTok, where we have a fantastic team of young scholars highlighting Jewish languages on a regular basis. If you appreciate the wide range of resources that we offer to learners of all ages, please consider giving to our ongoing fundraiser. When you visit jewishlanguages.org, simply click on the donate or volunteer button on the top right of the page. Thank you for joining the movement to preserve and celebrate this precious linguistic heritage. In closing, I'll just mention 2 exciting things that we have on the horizon. Starting June 17th, we'll be offering a 3-session course on reading Judeo-Baghdadi Arabic. You can sign up at our events page, jewishlanguages.org/events, and please RSVP by June 9th. We've already seen a huge response to this course offering, which is wonderful. Also, we're pleased to announce a new program called Heirloom, a Jewish language revitalization initiative that we're launching in partnership with the Oxford School of Rare Jewish Languages. Heirloom's goal is to document and revitalize endangered Jewish languages so they can remain in Jewish families for generations to come. And in that sense, it's very resonant with the themes discussed on the panel today. Heirloom has 3 tracks for participation. You can submit heritage words to our crowdsourced lexicons, train as a language advocate, or participate in a mentor-learner language learning pair. This July, we'll be piloting the mentor-learner track for Judeo-Baghdadi Arabic. If you have questions or are interested in teaching or learning Judeo-Baghdadi Arabic this July, we would love to be in touch. Please email us at heirloomjlp@gmail.com. And stay tuned for more Heirloom updates in the coming months. Thank you again for joining us for today's program. We hope to see you again soon. And as I say in my heritage language, Ladino, Semanada Buena, have a good week.